Great.
Good afternoon, everybody. Buenas tardes. My name is Frankie Miranda, and I am the president and CEO of the Hispanic Federation. Before we start, some housekeeping items in Spanish. Para aquellos que estén participando a través de la plataforma de Zoom y quieran escuchar esta charla en español, pueden seleccionar el canal en español utilizando el botón del globo del mundo que está en la parte baja derecha de su pantalla. Muchas gracias. I would like to welcome everyone today to this discussion with senior members of the Biden administration and the majority leader of the United States Senate, Senator Chuck Schumer, as we collectively celebrate the unprecedented investments made by the federal government in Puerto Rico in the first year of President Biden's term in office. Hispanic Federation is a national nonprofit organization founded more than 30 years ago in New York City. We build power in Latino communities through collaboration, collective action, policy advocacy, and capacity building with Latino-led nonprofit organizations, public and private sector partnerships, and community programs. Today, we have offices in 4 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico, and a strong network of more than 400 diverse Latino-led organizations across 40 states and Puerto Rico. In the year 2021 alone, we committed more than $20 million in grants to this powerful national network, and together, we mobilized more than 1 million Latino voters, trained 11,000 people in the digital skills needed for our new economy, vaccinated 350,000 individuals, and provided emergency relief and services to more than 4.2 million people. 4 years ago, when Hurricanes Irma and Maria devastated Puerto Rico, members of the diaspora, frustrated and concerned with the prior administration's slow, politicized, and criminal response to the disaster, took action in solidarity with our friends and family in the archipelago. Hispanic Federation, among the first responders, made the decision to open a permanent office in San Juan and work with local groups towards a just and sustainable recovery. With the support with people like Lin-Manuel Miranda and donations from more than 200,000 individuals and private institutions, Hispanic Federation since invested more than $45 million in private funds towards grants, projects, and initiatives, and funded more than 130 incredible local nonprofit organizations. I am proud of how our collective cross-sector investments and advocacy have strengthened renewable energy, agriculture and food security, housing and community development, small businesses, health and mental health care, emergency relief and preparedness, and civic engagement in Puerto Rico. However, we must recognize that no amount of private and philanthropic efforts can replace the economic power and obligations of the federal government in Puerto Rico's long-term recovery. Since President Biden took office, his administration has unlocked hurricane disaster funds appropriated by previous Congress and quickly removed many discriminatory barriers to access those funds put in place by the previous administration. Together with Congress, under the leadership of Senate Majority Leader Schumer and Speaker Nancy Pelosi, they rose to the challenge of the pandemic and provided billions in resources to individuals and local government to battle the pandemic and keep people safe, including our people in Puerto Rico. We celebrate those investments and the steps taken to create a more collaborative and transparent relationship between the federal government and groups in Puerto Rico. At the same time, we must collectively acknowledge that Puerto Rico is facing an ongoing crisis, economic crisis, precarious infrastructure, unsustainably high utility costs, as well as the highest poverty rates in the US and among the highest unemployment and poorest health outcomes compared to anywhere in the US. This has all exacerbated the alarming out-migration of young families and professionals over the last decade. The root causes of these conditions go back more than a century and are grounded in both a history and current reality of defending institutionalized discrimination and racism that will take more than 1 year to remedy. but must be addressed seriously. We look forward to continuing our work with Congress and the Biden administration as we advocate always for the voices of the people living in Puerto Rico to take the lead in both crafting and implementing the solutions of these problems. I would like now to have the honor, now to introduce Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to say a few words before we begin our conversation with members of the White House team. Senator Schumer, as the Senator of New York and now Majority Leader, he has been a long friend of the Federation and the people of Puerto Rico and a strong advocate for the island. Senator Schumer.
Well, thank you, Frankie. And first, let me thank the Hispanic Federation and you in particular as its leader, but all the people who work there and the member organizations. I know of no organization more effective than in fighting for the beliefs you have in helping Puerto Rico and the Hispanic community than yours. And it has been a pleasure over the years for us to be like brothers in the battle. I thank you very much for your good work. And I also want to thank the administration. The fact so many heavy, powerful people are on this Zoom shows A, how much the administration cares about Puerto Rico, and B, shows how much respect the Hispanic Federation has with the administration. So it's a great combination, and I'm proud to and glad to take a few minutes at the beginning. You know, I have always regarded myself as not just the senator from New York, but the senator from Puerto Rico as well. Over the decades, one of my biggest fights has always been to treat Puerto Rico fairly, which all too often the United States government has not done, mostly under Republicans, but even under Democrats. But I'm so glad that we have the Biden administration because they have undone so many of the wrongs and worked so strongly with us to produce some change. The most recent change we got was the great news about Caño Martín Peña. When I visited Puerto Rico in November, I got to see firsthand the terrible conditions in the Caño. And last week, along with Representative Velasquez, we announced great news that the Caño Martín Peña Ecosystem Restoration Project is being fully funded by the Army Corps of Engineers. And I thank the administration. When Nydia and I asked, you were there. As many of you know, the Martín Peña Canal is severely degraded, polluted with debris and sediment filling up the canal. One of the worst examples of environmental injustice and environmental racism that we have seen. When it rains, the polluted waters flood the homes of the residents. It impacts the stormwater system for the Luis Muñoz Marin Airport nearby. But it's not just about the project itself, it's about the people in the community who call it home. In the 1950s, a lot of urban migrants set up initial communities along the canal. Over 26,000 people live there today. Many disadvantaged communities of color and many poor immigrants who left the Dominican Republic to come to Puerto Rico. For too long, they've had to live with the environmental hazards imposed by the Caño, flooding, natural disasters. They tremble every time it rains. So the project is not just about restoring environment, it's about restoring environmental justice for the communities of the Caño. And it's been a grassroots up movement. When I went to the canal, to the Caño, I was so impressed with the groups, the partners, and LESE. They have partnered with the Army Corps of Engineers to come up with a plan and finally dredge the canal. And the project, $167 million, that's a lot of money needed. The project will clear the debris and dredge the canal to 10 feet deep and 100 feet wide and stabilize it. So I've been supporting this for a long time. And Nydia and I, Congresswoman Velasquez, who I call La Luchadora, I gave her that nickname, in fact, and now she calls me El Luchador, which is a nice return compliment. But in any case, we fought for it. And we got money. And for 3 years, the Trump administration, with their contempt for Puerto Rico, 2019, 2020, and 2021, they stopped the funding. But once the Biden administration came in, we knew we had a friend. Nydia and I passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill this year. It included $17 billion for Army Corps, including $1.9 billion for aquatic ecosystem projects. And one of the reasons we designed it was we knew that Caño would fit in. So now they're getting $163 million. It's great news. And I was so delighted to speak to the people from Enlace and G8 and the community groups who put it together. A few more quick things about Puerto Rico, and then I'll let you get on to the program. I also, when I was last in Puerto Rico, visited Residencial San Patricio, a public housing site in Louisa. I know from my experience in New York how lack of investment in public housing has led to dire circumstances for the residents. And public housing is so important in Puerto Rico. It has more public housing than Chicago, Boston, and Philadelphia combined, the second most to New York. So that's why it's so important to make sure that the AVP, the Puerto Rican Housing Authority, Administración de Vivienda Pública, finally receives the investment it needs. We're fighting along with the administration to get that done. Climate change in Puerto Rico, as you know, in the last decade, Puerto Rico experienced three, not one or two, but three extreme weather events, $150 billion in damage. We all remember how vividly the pain and suffering that Maria brought to the people of Puerto Rico and the callous response by the Trump administration. They wouldn't get the disaster relief out of the door. I worked with President Biden, along with Nydia and others, to get these funds out the door. And now I am happy to say that the money has gone there and is now helping. These investments will help Puerto Rico emerge. COVID relief, we all know what COVID has happened, and Puerto Rico has had some of the highest levels. We made sure that Puerto Rico was treated equally in the COVID relief bills, whether it was the direct $1,400 payments, the enhanced unemployment, rent relief, or FEMA funeral assistance. All too often, US excludes Puerto Rico or says you only get it half-baked. That was on the child tax credit, that beautiful thing that gave $300 a child to every family with a child there under 6, and $250 for 6 to 17. The law said for the CTC, this is, in my opinion, an example of just outright bigotry. In every other place in this United States, you would get for each child, but in Puerto Rico, only for 3 children. I hated that. We changed it. Now Puerto Rico is treated the same as everybody else. And finally, we fought to extend pandemic EBT, the feeding program for children who can't go to school, to Puerto Rico. 320,000 kids got food. So we've done a lot for Puerto Rico. We will continue to work with the Hispanic Federation, Frankie, and all of you. And again, what a distinguished group on the line. You're going to have a great conversation. And any way that I, as your senior senator and the senator from Puerto Rico, can follow up, I'm always available. There's a car service in Brooklyn, 449-1111, always available. That's me. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I know it'll be productive.
Thank you so much. Bye, bye. Thank you so much for your leadership and your years of friendship. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
I would like now to introduce Gretchen Sierra-Zorita, another longtime advocate for Puerto Rico, who joined the Biden administration in a new role as the White House Associate Director for Puerto Rico and the Territories. Since her appointment, Gretchen has been connecting the White House with stakeholders and community all across the archipelago. Hispanic Federation, we had the pleasure of hosting Gretchen's visit to Puerto Rico last November and learn more about the successful recovery efforts we're leading and the challenges of local communities. Gretchen, thank you for joining us today and for facilitating the next portion of the conversation, where we will hear from more people working on the recovery, ensuring the recovery of Puerto Rico. Gracias, Gretchen.
Gracias a ti. Hola, Frankie. Thank you so much for those kind words. And it's such an honor to have Senator Schumer, an ally and a champion of Puerto Rico, speaking to us today. I would like to start by saying that the White House is very grateful to Hispanic Federation for taking the lead on this event, but we're even more grateful for all the work Hispanic Federation is doing in Puerto Rico, not only through significant allocations of resources, but also by helping to build the capacity of the Puerto Rican civic sector to bring about transformational change in our communities and on the island, something we need. Speaking of Puerto Rican communities, and they'll be hearing about themselves a lot, specifically persistent, productive, powerful Puerto Rican communities, I cannot think of a better way to celebrate the first year of the Biden administration than through the announcement on that same day of the $163 million from the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act to restore El Caño de Martín Peña and the surrounding areas of the San Juan Bay National Estuary. I cannot thank President Biden enough for getting this project through the finish line, as well as the congressional support we received. I would also like to thank President Biden and his administration for doing more for Puerto Rico in 1 year than any American president has done in 4 or even 8. It is a fact. You can check it out in the White House first anniversary Puerto Rico fact sheet published a couple of days ago. Through the American Rescue Plan, President Biden has made sure that Puerto Rico, the most vaccinated place in the nation, Bravo, has the medical tools to combat the pandemic through and the resources to lessen the economic impact through direct aid to individuals, schools, businesses. On reconstruction, President Biden has made sure his administration hit the ground running on day 1. In our first year, FEMA has awarded $3 billion for 3,542 projects and canceled 371 million in community disaster loans, a huge help to our municipios. In coordination with the Department of Education, FEMA has allocated $2 billion to rebuild schools. Housing and Urban Development has obligated 90% of Puerto Rico's recovery funds during the first year, which were being held up by Trump machinations. Thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, Puerto Rico will receive over $1 billion to repair Puerto Rican roads and bridges. We may never have to adopt another boquete again, cross your fingers. And the law contains funding for other Puerto Rico infrastructure priorities as well, such as infrastructure and high-speed internet, among many other things. And finally, President Biden is investing in Puerto Rico's most valuable assets, Puerto Rico's human infrastructure, by providing tax credits previously unavailable to families raising children and Puerto Rican workers raising Medicaid and nutritional assistance. Now, I would like you to know that throughout the federal government, talented and experienced people are working on Puerto Rico right now. Never a dull day. Many of these people happen to work in the White House, and I would like to introduce them to you now. We're very fortunate to have them with us here today. Jean Sperling is the American Rescue Plan Coordinator and Senior Advisor to the President. Mitch Landrieu is the Senior Advisor and Infrastructure Coordinator to the President. And Carmel Martin is the Deputy Director for Economic Mobility, White House Domestic Policy Council. Thank you for being here. Jean, would you like to start? Volume, Jean, volume.
Usually in my house, my 15-year-old is telling me I talk too loud all the time. So I'm happy to occasionally have people say I'm muted or too soft. So I'm so happy and honored to be there. I was so inspired to hear what Majority Leader Schumer said, because it is, and what Gretchen has said about how historic this year is due to the American Rescue Plan. And some of that is great and positive and forward-looking. And I'll be honest, as I think the senator was very forthcoming in saying, some of it is corrective. Some of it is just doing the right thing that we haven't always, done before, and truly treating Puerto Rico with the equity and dignity, and that, within the very numbers of who's gotten help and how much help, and the value of all children in our country, whether they're in Puerto Rico or New York City or Ann Arbor, Michigan. So, I don't have to run through the numbers with you. I mean, how extraordinary the American, with $4 billion coming in combined state and local, $3 billion for your K through 12 schools, $1 billion in nutrition. It is, it's exceptional. And I'm happy to talk with anyone on this call, more answer questions, more on the details of American Rescue Plan. But I have a few minutes here, and I want to zero in on one thing, and I'm going to build off what Senator Schumer said. There is nothing I'm probably more proud of in my public life is that starting in 1993, that I was able to play a pretty significant role in the expansion of the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit through 3 different presidencies. I'm very proud of that. It has made a huge difference. It has lifted millions and millions of children out of poverty every year. It has helped tens of millions of hard-pressed families get by, have a little bit more to provide for and care for their children, deal with a rainy day. I'm so proud of that. Let me tell you what I'm not proud of. I'm not proud of the fact that I don't believe Puerto Rico has ever been cut in equitably. Now, I never had a single, so before I was coordinator of the president's American Rescue Plan, I was the national economic advisor under both President Obama and President Clinton, almost 7.5 years. I never had one day where we had an all Democratic Congress. So we were not able to correct everything that we would have liked when I was NEC director, but I'd still, the idea that the child tax credit was only going to families with 3 or more children, that the earned income tax credit, after showing what an amazing incentive for work it is, what a difference it's made in everything from reducing poverty to the prospects for children's advancement as adults, their learning. The fact that we knew that we expanded that, and that you never really cut Puerto Rico in, or never in an equal way, is just not something any of us are proud of. What I'm proud of is that when President Biden had this moment where he had Chuck Schumer as the majority leader and Nancy Pelosi as speaker on these 2 areas, we did it right. Because what was done right here is not just what happened in the American Rescue Plan for 2021. We made certain things permanent. The EITC now comes at $600 million adjusted for inflation. People can get up to $1,500, both in the States and Puerto Rico. If you're a worker with non-dependent children, you could now get up to not just 2,000, but up to 4,000 or 6,000 if you're workers with children. And that will go on, and that will be a permanent part. So the fact that they didn't just fix it for this year, but corrected it. In fact, President Biden did that, is extraordinarily important. On the child tax credit, of course, it was improved in many, many ways. The child credit for children under 6 went to $3,000. For children 6 to 17, it went to $3,600. But really important, most important, is that until now, 27 million kids just in the stateside did not get the full credit. Half of all Black and Latino children did not get the full credit because their parents didn't make enough income. Now, I mean, you can never wrap your mind around that. If your parents are not making as much income, that means they're struggling more than most working parents to care for their children. And so our law gave them less. Not this year. Now everyone gets the same amount, unless you're making a significant amount of money, like 6 figures and more. Everyone else now gets the same amount. And that's, again, true whether it's New York City, Ann Arbor, Michigan, or Puerto Rico. So this is extremely, extremely important. I'm just, again, the expansions are tremendous. The corrective, the equal treatment, that's just justice long overdue, but delivered by President Biden. But the one thing you see with President Biden, and you see this not just because I'm here, but because my partner, Mitch Landrieu, is here too, is President Biden is never one to think, well, we passed the law, we're done. What he asks us about, what he presses, and not just Mitch and I who are in charge of implementation, but you ask Carmel, those campaign meetings we used to have with her, with Mitch's daughter, Grace, he was always asking, how are people going to get it? How are they going to know they're going to get it? It's about actually delivering the money that matters. And so, this is incredibly important. So on the child tax credit and the EITC, we need an all-out effort. And I promise you this, we are going to be full partners in the implementation. I appreciate the work the Youth Development Institute's done, that Aspacios and Abiertos has done, but we're going to have United Way has done, but we're going to need everybody. We have an American Rescue Plan team at the White House that is dedicated to getting signups for the child tax credit. I mean, a family with a couple of kids, this could be $7,200. a meaningful amount. With their EITC, over $10,000. This could really make a major impact, but only if we get people signed up. We're going all out. I have a full-time staffer that I stole from the Census Department. Many of you know, Lorena Molina Iziari is on our team, is working on this. She's obviously from Puerto Rico. Family is still there, Zooms in many a week from there, and is all in. And that's part of our commitment. But the thing I just want to say going forward, because we can't do this, but this is for future conversations, is we just did this effort on the states. And I'm going to be very honest and candid because people's lives are at stake. We went out and did a lot of, hey, everybody, let's increase awareness. Well, guess what? If you increase awareness, you're going to help a certain number of people. There are a certain number of people that if they hear they're eligible for this, they are going to fight through a complicated tax form. They're going to fight to their, to you know, the hacienda locations. They're going to fight to the VITA places. They'll get them. But we know that lots will not. That there are lots of people who've been in the cash economy who have not filed taxes, where a complicated form, where not having somebody to navigate, well, not having somebody to pick up the phone and call can make all the difference. And I will say, we had an amazing effort on the state side, but it was partially successful. We got 1 million people kids were not signed up, but a lot of them we got automatically signed up. The ones we fought for, we did well. We filled a few football stadiums of those children, but it was hard, and it's hard work, and it's last mile, and it's on the ground. So I just want to say, we got to be tough on ourselves, not just be happy enough that we're doing a little advertising or outreach. We got to think about where are physical places people are going to go. Will there be enough people there knowledgeable to help them? What are the internet options, and who can they call when they're having difficulties? Can you get the private sector to help without fleecing people? These are difficult on the ground issues. And then secondly, I can't announce this yet, but we are absolutely committed that once you get to April 15th, having a simplified, easy, non-filer application like we worked with Code for America. So until April 15th, we got to get everybody we can to sign up for their full taxes, EITC, and the child tax credit. And I think after April 15th, we'll need to do a second campaign. But we're in it, not just in some rhetorical way. We're in it on the ground. We're in it to talk to philanthropy. We're in it to find, you know, whatever celebrities we can, including celebrities like the president and vice president, to really help. This is life-changing. It is a big deal. And we want to get it done, not just talk about it. So thank you for everything. Thank you for how we're going to work together. I really appreciate it.
Gene, I think you meant to pass that to me, so I got it. Gene,
Mitch,
partner Gene.
Mitch, I'm officially passing to the man who's actually, and I mean this, physically and metaphorically building bridges around this country. The floor is yours, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Czar.
Thank you, Gene. In it to win it. That's what I'm going to call you. That's your new nickname. I don't know who has more energy, Leader Schumer, who I would love to have as my godfather and my senator. So I'm pumped up that he was able to join us, and to my great partner, Gene, and to Frankie and the Hispanic Federation, and to the entire White House team who's here and committed to rebuilding Puerto Rico. All of you know the Biden-Harris administration is committing to supporting the island's success. He's committed to move billions of dollars to support the recovery and the long-term resilience that, you know, both Gene and the senator went through. So I won't repeat. But the bipartisan infrastructure law is just a small part, as big as it's going to be. And it does represent a historic opportunity to rebuild the infrastructure and, more importantly, the economy of the island. And we, as an administration, as you know, are deeply committed, as has been spoken to often, about equity, racial and territorial, in implementing this bill. Now, I haven't met all of you, but many of you know that I'm from Louisiana. And as a former lieutenant governor of that state, and then the mayor of the city of New Orleans, I know you know what it's like to have to rebuild after having been devastated. Both New Orleans and Louisiana were on our backs after Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, Ike, Gustav, the BP oil spill, the national recession, and now Ida. And everything we did in New Orleans at work required the federal, state, and local governments, not-for-profit partners, faith communities, and the private sector, all partners at the table. And this is going to be no different. All hands on deck. As Gene said, it's going to require everyone. And of course, I know the complication of navigating the federal bureaucracy. It makes you crazy based on my experience post-Katrina. And so we're going to do everything we can to break down the silos, provide support, offer technical assistance, and as Gene said, the last mile, get down to the ground where it counts and where everybody lives. And I know how important it is to have equity built in throughout, from the program design to the scoring to capacity building and to support. Now, as mayor, I had the opportunity to visit Puerto Rico a few times following Maria and the earthquakes, help set up a network to provide local mayors support, paired with philanthropy and mayors in the rest of the country. So I've seen the situation on the ground firsthand. Now, when President asked me to do this job, he asked me not just to build things back the way they were before, but he wants to build things back better. And I want to talk about what better means to President Biden. Better means roads and bridges so we can get to school and work on time. Better means investing in high-speed internet to connect everybody to the modern economy. Better means investing in climate and natural disaster resilient infrastructure, power grids, water, and so much more. There are few places where this matters as much as it does to Puerto Rico. Better also requires accountability, transparency, so we make sure that this money is spent well and wisely and where it's supposed to be spent. This is something that's going to be built from the ground up and not the top down. It's a core part of what we're doing to implement the bipartisan infrastructure law both wisely and well. Now, all of us know, as Gene said, nothing that we're going to try to do is easy, but you have the full commitment for a whole of government approach from this White House and from President Biden and Vice President Harris personally. Our team is specifically focused on how do we help make sure Puerto Rico has what it needs to be successful, both in terms of money and capacity. And we will do so in complete and total partnership with you. You have the president's commitment. Thank you all so much for having me with you today. And now I'll pass it over to Carmel, who has been leading the effort on Build Back Better.
Thanks so much, Mitch. It's an honor and a privilege to follow both you and Gene, and we're lucky to have you guiding these historic efforts that the administration has been moving forward with. I'm going to try to be brief because I want to make sure we have time to hear from our champions from several of our agencies. But I just wanted to take a minute, first of all, to introduce myself. It's an honor to be with you. It's been great to be a partner with Frankie on all things Puerto Rico. As Gene mentioned, I worked on the president's campaign and worked on our Puerto Rico policy. And now I am a deputy director at the Domestic Policy Committee and Council, and work across an economic mobility portfolio. And one of the things in my portfolio is helping to support our interagency efforts that are designed to support Puerto Rico and the people of Puerto Rico. So I'm just going to talk about a couple more issues and then turn it over back over to Frankie to get to our panel of members from across the administration from various agencies. The two issues I wanted to touch upon are healthcare and education. Although one of my colleagues from the education department is also on, so can go a little bit deeper there. First, as both Gene and Mitch and Gretchen mentioned, we are committed to ensuring that we're providing the people of Puerto Rico with equal treatment in federal programs. You've heard about some of the progress we've made. We know there's still more progress to be made, but one of the areas that we're very proud of is healthcare. We all know that pandemic has really brought to the forefront the importance of ensuring that people have access to healthcare to keep our community safe and help get families back on their feet. But Puerto Rico's Medicaid program, which has been a lifeline to our most vulnerable populations, has long been underfunded, receiving unequal support compared to states and threatening Puerto Rico's fragile healthcare system. So that's why the Department of Health and Human Services announced in September that Puerto Rico would receive an additional $3 billion per year in federal funding for Medicaid. And that's $3 billion a year indexed to inflation moving forward to keep up with rising costs. We think this is a game changer for the Puerto Rico's healthcare system and the 1.5 million Puerto Ricans who rely on Medicaid. But we also know there's still more to be done to achieve parity with the mainland and ensure that all Puerto Ricans have access to quality care. But we do believe this is a tremendous step forward and demonstrate that the Biden-Harris administration is committed to action in this space. And we're going to keep fighting for additional action. Likewise, a top priority for our interagency efforts around support for Puerto Rico have focused on education. Our Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, visited Puerto Rico early in his tenure to demonstrate our commitment to improving education at all levels. And in our first year, we've worked hard to back up that commitment. We know that schools in Puerto Rico face a crisis of both infrastructure and achievement, with natural disasters taking a toll on an already aging school facilities and on the mental health, well-being, and performance of students. And that has only been exacerbated by the pandemic, as is the case all across the country. Our teachers are doing the best they can every single day, but declining student enrollment and teacher shortages make it even more difficult to provide Puerto Rico's children and young adults with the education they need to compete and succeed in the 21st century. So that's why we made it, that President Biden made it a priority to invest in and rebuild Puerto Rico's public education system. And when we launched our White House working group on Puerto Rico last summer with cabinet secretaries and senior officials across the federal government, schools were identified as a top area of focus. And we're really thrilled to have Secretary Cardona leading the charge there. So the Department of Education provided $6.7 billion for pandemic relief and grants for Puerto Rico over the first year of this administration. And the island has access to more than $2 billion in FEMA public assistance funding to build our schools. So we're working hard to support these efforts. And just last week, FEMA and the Department of Education released a toolkit of federal resources available to help Puerto Rico rebuild safe, healthy, and modernized schools, and developed in partnership with the Department of Energy and Labor and the Environmental Protection Agency, so we can make sure that as we rebuild schools, safety and health and resilience are all embedded in these efforts. And we're going to continue to invest in the island's schools, colleges, students, and teachers to build the strongest possible foundation for Puerto Rico's future. So I want to thank you for allowing me to speak about our efforts on these two topics. Again, my colleague from Chris Soto will talk a little bit more about the work we've done in education. And I'm really proud of the work we've done together, and really proud of our partnership with the Hispanic Federation, and really look forward to continuing to work together. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Frankie. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's just jump very quickly into the Q&A from our office in Washington, D.C. Laura Esquivel, Vice President of Federal Policy and Advocacy, will be starting the conversation, followed by Maritere Padilla Rodriguez, Director of our Puerto Rico and Advocacy Office in Puerto Rico. And also facilitating this conversation is our Chief Director of Puerto Rico Office, Charlotte Cosset Navarro. Charlotte, take it away.
Thank you, Frankie, and thank you to the members of the administration. While the first half has primarily focused on the historic investments and progress made over the first year of the Biden administration, we want to use this final portion to discuss some of the urgent challenges that persist. We have a few new members of the administration joining us for this final discussion, and I would like to ask Gretchen to briefly introduce them. And if everyone for this portion could turn their cameras on, we want everyone to join us for the panel discussion.
There we go. Thank you, Charlotte. I would like to introduce some of the Puerto Ricans in the Biden administration I have the pleasure of working with on a regular basis. These include Rosana Torres Pizarro, Senior Advisor for Puerto Rico, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development; Chris Soto, Department of Education, Senior Advisor to the Secretary, U.S. Department of Education. Miguel Estienne, Acting National Director, Minority Business Development Agency, Department of Commerce. And again, Carmel Martin, who a lot of people in Puerto Rico don't know who she is, but she actually has been a friend of Puerto Rico before day one when this all started. So thank you, Carmel.
Thank you, Gretchen. So the more than 300 participants who registered for today's conversation were all invited to submit questions for the administration, and they raised many critical issues from climate change to decolonization. We have selected three that came up multiple times: parity in federal programs, energy infrastructure, and equity in access. However, we will share all of the questions submitted with the administration. To present the first topic, we have Laura Esquivel, Vice President of Federal Policy and Advocacy at Hispanic Federation, joined by Betsaida Ramos, Executive Director of Movimiento para el Alcance de Vida Independiente, MAVI, which is the largest organization dedicated to the promotion of independent living and inclusion for people living with disabilities in Puerto Rico. Laura.
Good afternoon, everyone. 4 years ago, we could not have imagined the devastation and marginalization that Puerto Rico would endure in its efforts to recover from an unprecedented natural disaster. However, similar to the racial and economic inequities that COVID revealed, Maria also exposed the vulnerability of an island with a decaying energy infrastructure, a weak social safety net, and an unjust relationship with the United States, which continues to be defended. Most eye-opening for many has been Congress's ability to discriminate against U.S. citizens living in Puerto Rico by denying equal access to federal safety net programs like SSI food stamps for the poor and equitable access to health care through Medicaid and Medicare. It's no coincidence that Puerto Rico has long been denied equitable access to a whole range of federal programs designed to support and lift vulnerable Americans out of poverty, and as a result, has the highest poverty rates for adults and children across the U.S. The changes discussed earlier to remedy the disparity in the child tax credit program and to significantly boost EITC are major advances and should rightly be celebrated. However, equitable treatment and full participation in these federal safety net programs is our North Star. We think 100 years is long enough to rely on the legal doctrine that allows this inequitable treatment. We have urged President Biden to drop the Justice Department's defense of discrimination in the current Supreme Court case of Ayo Madero, and we understand the President thinks the solution should come from Congress. We were pleased when Congress proposed treating Puerto Rico equitably in SSI and increasing support for Medicaid and Build Back Better. However, without legislation and serious doubt, without a realistic plan to provide SSI to disabled, elderly, and blind Puerto Ricans or increase Medicaid subsidies, potentially life-saving benefits will continue to be denied to Puerto Ricans as long as they live on the island. The increase but temporary subsidy for food stamps for low-income, food insecure families and children on the island is also going to expire soon without any action from Congress. With this context in mind, I'd like to pass this to Betsaida to present the question.
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you to Hispanic Federation and the Biden administration for taking this time and providing this opportunity for us. So as Laura presented beforehand, we know that ending the disparities in SSI, SNAP, Medicaid, and Medicare would provide an influx of billions of dollars to the most vulnerable and impoverished citizens that are living currently in Puerto Rico. Our initial hopes were placed on the Ayo Madero case and the Build Back legislation to remediate these disparities. However, the uncertain atmosphere of positive outcomes in both the case and this legislation make it seem as if perhaps these remediative actions might not occur. So in this situation, what is the president's plan for ensuring the end to this actual two-tiered system of benefits to help low-income Americans, one for the citizens that actually live in the state and one for those who are living in U.S. territories such as Puerto Rico's? What is the plan? Thank you.
I think I'll take a crack at this. First of all, let me start by saying that I, as a Puerto Rican woman, I am keenly aware of these problems. We all know somebody, a family member, a friend, who is not having the benefits they need and they deserve. And we are all somehow involved in supporting them, either emotionally or even financially, because there are these disparities. I want to assure you that the Biden administration is also keenly aware of these disparities and the effect they have at the very personal level and the direct impact they have on economic development, because they do. And this is why from day one, we have been righting these wrongs. You know, in the year ago, we did not have EITC, we did not have CTC, we did not have a $3 billion floor for Medicaid, we did not have almost half 500 million additional for nutritional assistance. And today we do. Is it perfect? No. Is it getting us closer to parity? Yes. And I think that's really important. And this is just year one. Our first years of achievement should be a sign of our commitment and persistence, in spite of great congressional obstructionism, which I do not have to go into detail because you know what I'm talking about. Build Back Better is still a top priority for the president. It's already passed the House, and we're working with our Senate to get it over the finish line. Our intention is to correct this injustice and to make sure that all receive a fair treatment, and we will keep trying until we get it right. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we move on to looking at the time, we're going to move on to our next topic here. So as was already mentioned, Puerto Rico has a significant energy infrastructure problem. So to open the discussion on energy, we have Amy Horta Rivera, the Environmental Policy Coordinator from El Puente, Latino Climate Action Network in Puerto Rico. They are a leading organization on climate change issues in both the US and Puerto Rico. Amy.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Amy Horta Rivera from El Puente Latino Climate Action Network. The Biden administration has already allocated more than $10 billion through FEMA and HUD for the modernization and transformation of our energy grid. Plans for use of those funds are already underway and are seemingly misaligned with renewable energy goals. Right now, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to achieve life-saving resiliency in Puerto Rico and to make a Puerto Rico climate change model. Therefore, I ask, what are the specific strategies and mechanisms to ensure that federal investment in rebuilding Puerto Rico's energy infrastructure align with local and federal policy goals to reach 100% renewable energy by 2050 with an emphasis on rooftop solar energy with battery storage? Thank you.
I think I'm going to try again at this one, and maybe Rosanna, who is at HUD, can help me. The question, as I understand it, is how can we make sure that our investments are in line with the renewable energy goals? Well, as I don't know, some of you may know, but not, I will give a little explanation because hasn't been fully launched yet. The Department of Energy and FEMA are doing a comprehensive study to evaluate the pathways to meeting Puerto Rico's 100 renewable energy targets. It's called PR 100, and the point is to figure out how to do short-term recovery goals and long-term energy resilience. This study is grounded in a commitment to environmental and energy justice, which is part of the Biden agenda. And it will be informed by the government of Puerto Rico, but also extensive stakeholder involvement. And so that we can figure out how to work this and how to do, get to the islands to your priorities. FEMA will be providing technical assistance as part of the study, and the national labs of the Department of Energy will providing, which I think are 7, modeling and planning capabilities. Now, I know people are wondering, well, it's a study and how do we make this all works together? Well, this is a 2-year study, but during this time, what FEMA will be doing is basically dealing with high priority projects from facilities that were damaged and they resulted from hurricane that need to be repaired. And those things need to be done anyway. And it is meant to be done in a way that these projects are compatible with green energy, such that when the study is finished, we will have the information to continue to go in the direction that we want to go and that you want to go, which is to achieve the goal of 100 renewable energy. Now, there may be different paths to that, but this study will inform and will give us the tools and will give you the participation to be able to comply with what is Puerto Rican law, which is renewables by the year 2050, 100%. I also would like to, bring up the fact that, as you know, FEMA has the ability in Puerto Rico specifically because of waivers to build to industry standards. And industry standards means that FEMA can consider renewables as part of the portfolio. I also want to note that recently FEMA issued guidance on hazard mitigation grant funding for microgrid projects. And it highlights the benefits of microgrids to strengthen community lifelines and resiliency. So there is a knowledge and there is a commitment to that. So I hope that satisfies your question. And I'd like to turn it over to Rosanna, who is funding part of the grid through HUD, just for FEMA is putting 9.4, and I think HUD is putting 1.9 billion. And Rosanna, take it from here.
Thank you, Gretchen, and gracias por la pregunta, Amy. Thank you all for the invitation to be here. It really is great to be a part of this cast. Now, before I answer your question in particular, I do want to take a moment to recognize all the organizations in Puerto Rico, some of which are joining us today, that have been critical advocates into seeing through all of the accomplishments that have been highlighted today. Against all odds, you've shed light on many of the shortcomings on federal policy towards Puerto Rico. You organized, you did the research, you knocked on doors, and slowly but surely things are starting to move. So I think it's very clear that your efforts are highlighted and really reflected in the progress that Puerto Rico sees today. And so as it relates to HUD, Puerto Rico is definitely a priority for Secretary Fudge. She's been very clear from the very beginning that she wants to ensure Puerto Rico has the necessary funding and support to move the reconstruction process along. I think in light of that, under her leadership, she created this position in HUD that directly focuses on and understands Puerto Rico. And that extends beyond reconstruction efforts, right? That includes the whole suite of HUD's programs. I personally would like to see my role institutionalized across federal government agencies. And I say that, and I make emphasis on it, because despite increasing awareness about Puerto Rico in the federal government, there are varying degrees of that knowledge, and that has a direct impact on how we design programs and policies. So having said that, I couldn't agree more. Undoubtedly, an essential component to Puerto Rico's economic development and success hinges on how the energy system in Puerto Rico is transformed. And actually just yesterday, we received Puerto Rico's action plan for its use on energy funds. And though it's still way too early to weigh in, but I can assure you the entire team is closely reviewing it. And that will unlock 1.9 billion for the energy grid. I think it's important to keep in mind the totality of funds. FEMA is really the majority investor of the electrical grid on island. The key difference being that with HUD's funding, there are requirements that are specifically targeted to improve cost effectiveness, reliability, resilience, sustainability, and really long-term financial viability.
Thank you for your answers to the question. We noticed that we're running a little bit short on time of where we had hoped to be in the agenda at this point. And we have a few more really important topics that we wanted to discuss. So we're hoping that those members of the administration who are able to can remain with us so that we can ensure that we get those questions asked and hear from you all. So I'm going to put that question out to the members of the administration, or Gretchen, if you can give me a thumbs up to that.
Carmel, can you stay past? Great, excellent. Okay.
Great.
And
you.
also Miguel, can you stay? Because I want to give Miguel and Chris, can you both stay?
I unfortunately have a sharp stop. I'm so sorry, Gretchen.
Can we let Miguel introduce himself before we go to the next question? Because he is a key part of our team and I want him to have that time.
Of course, please do.
No, sure. Well, listen, I am pleased to be in this call. I am originally from Puerto Rico. I am the head of the Minority Business Development Agency, but more importantly, I represent the Department of Commerce, the task force. And, when I think about economic development, I see that as the common ground that brings this entire agenda together. I mean, the one thing that we all agree in the island and in the US is that we want Puerto Rico to prosper. And the amount of investment that is coming to the island, whether it's through FEMA HUD for infrastructure matters, to rebuild not only the material infrastructure, but also the social safety net, should be guided by principles or a vision of where we want the island to be in 15 to 20 years. And to the extent that we can support that vision, we're gonna do that. And that is our main role in commerce, is to support the vision of the people of Puerto Rico through the tools and resources that are across the government, whether it's coming from SBA, Treasury, Commerce, you name it. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to introduce myself. And Gretchen, Charlotte, take it back.
Thank you, Miguel. If you stay with us for the next few minutes, you're going to hear a topic that I think will be relevant to you, which is one of the priorities of the administration, specifically equity and racial justice as it concerns the access to those federal resources. Often, despite the availability of federal funds, the barriers to access are so high that the funds are ultimately left inaccessible to those who need them most. So to speak more on the issue, in particular the barriers faced by nonprofit community groups, we have Elizabeth Colon Rivera, Executive Director of Ponce Neighborhood Housing Services. They're a federal housing counseling agency in Puerto Rico and leader in local community and economic development.
Hi, good afternoon to you all. Thank you, Charlotte. As you mentioned, our organization is a housing counseling agency, so we know firsthand how difficult it can be to apply and implement federal grants, contracts, and recovery assistance. Part of our works involve providing technical assistance to other groups and individuals that apply, but many are discouraged, have been rejected, or do not meet the steep eligibility requirements. There are obvious barriers, for example, materials, applications, and technical assistance in English only, shutting out native Spanish speakers. Many federal programs are primarily accessible through complicated online platforms, even though only 60% of households have broadband internet access. Most nonprofits cannot raise the high matching funds required by federal grants and lack adequate capital to participate in the reimbursement-based federal payment structures. The federal government has not used its discretion to waive those requirements. The scale of the grants can also present a problem when compared to the small operation of most local nonprofits best positioned to deliver service to people in need. The scoring system used to evaluate applications, although objective on paper, prioritize experience managing large federal funds. This leads to many of the same groups receiving funds and many federal grants and contracts ultimately favor larger US-based nonprofits and businesses over local ones. This also means the potential for local economic development and capacity building from the funding that is diminished. In addition, a lot of federal funding requires collaboration with the local government. This is not a bad thing, but also poses challenges. First, it assumes that a culture of government collaboration with nonprofits exists, which is not historically the case in Puerto Rico. And second, we have found that in the case of recovery funding, the Puerto Rico government often uses their discretion to add additional eligibility requirements on top of the federal requirements. So my question is, given all the barriers to entry and unique realities of Puerto Rico, what specific steps is the Biden administration taking to ensure equitable access to federal funds for Puerto Rico communities, businesses, and nonprofit organizations? Thank you.
Gretchen, do you want me to jump in?
Yes, this is right up your alley, Carmel.
Yeah. This is a very hot topic for us. As you all, I'm sure, are aware, the president has issued on his first day of office a historic executive order on advancing equity and racial justice throughout the federal government, and that order directed all federal agencies to pursue a comprehensive approach to advancing equity for all, including people living in the territories, and asked them to think about the question that you're raising. This is something we just spent 2 hours yesterday talking through the Mitch's task force on the infrastructure bill. We talked about specific strategies for addressing the challenges that you mentioned. And through our working group on Puerto Rico, we're planning on specifically thinking about this through the lens of Puerto Rico, but more broadly, also thinking about it to ensure with a deep appreciation that federal grant making processes are often cumbersome and complicated and burdensome for many communities, but especially for territorial governments. And we want to make sure we're getting to a place where it doesn't require hiring specialized contractors to submit applications, and ensuring that there is that connectivity between local actors and nonprofits and local community groups. So some of the things that we're talking about specifically with respect to the bipartisan infrastructure law is looking for ways to reduce the administrative burdens on federal funding processes that by simplifying application processes, expanding technical assistance for low-income communities that need additional support navigating grant making, and making sure that technical assistance is not compliance oriented, but really helping people access the support they need to be successful, and ensuring that as grant recipients and contractors are using dollars, that they're advancing equitable outcomes and involving local communities as they're making project decisions that will impact their neighborhoods. Things like, project labor agreements, for example, but other ways of getting local community input into the projects at play, and making sure that people in the community qualify for the jobs that we'll be creating through these new programs. And then we're looking to partner with advocates and funders to expand access for underserved communities. So this is something that we're very intensely thinking about in the context of the implementation of the infrastructure package. It is something that Jean is thinking about in the context of the rescue plan. And then across the government, we're thinking about it. How can we ensure that customer experience when they're engaging with the federal government is good and achieves the objectives that we're trying to achieve, which is to help people. And I maybe with that, see if any of my colleagues from agencies have some specific examples of things they're doing in this space, because I know it's something that's a high priority across the cabinet.
Sure. Elizabeth, thank you for your question. I hear you. You make an incredibly important point. For way too long, our policies have been somewhat short-sighted, and there is a need to move towards a more bottom-up engagement with the island, one that definitely stretches beyond the Beltway here in BC, and one that fosters relationships with the residents and communities we serve. I think just as it relates to HUD in particular, even in our own mission and our governing statute is to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality, affordable homes for our. And that's a mission that every employee in the agency takes very seriously. And like I said, it's in our governing law. Section 3 of the law that creates us explicitly requires recipients to direct contract opportunities, employment, and job training to low and very low income residents. So that's why when we publish our notices, we emphasize that resources are allocated in a manner that benefits those directly impacted by the disasters, and that the investments are directed to underserved communities. And as it relates to the work that we've done thus far, with our ongoing collaboration, HUD is taking affirmative steps to support and help influence efforts that strengthen the existing local capacity, that promote transparency mechanisms, that incorporate marginalized populations in general in the decision-making process, so that we're prioritizing local procurement, and along the way that we're also making sure that we're protecting our environment and supporting economic development.
Great. I'll just jump in. Thank you Thank you to Hispanic Federation, particularly Charlotte and Maritere, who are on the ground, who've been gracious hosts. My name is Chris Soto. I'm Senior Advisor at the Education Department. I just want to add on to what Rosanna and Carmel said. Our education funding works a little differently because it goes to the Department of Education as federal programs. For the most part, there's some other programs, but I think the concept is still the same, right? Unprecedented funding means nothing if it's, in our case, if it's not getting directly to schools and teachers, so that way we can improve outcomes for students. And so I think that's why we are leaning in on this work as an administration, us in particularly at the Department of Education. It's about, meeting the education system where it's at. It means boots on the ground. So that way we're providing technical assistance. It means that we're translating documents where typically we just assume that guidance was understood. And we know that it's not the case because we need to meet our grantees where they're at as grantees. So that's just a little bit of perspective from our case. Our secretary, once he was confirmed, he got up to speed on the educational crisis that's happening in Puerto Rico with students, as you well know, who are out of the classroom for more than 2 years, which is why he has prioritized this work and why, we have, similarly to HUD, we have, a senior advisor at this level. So obviously this is the work that falls in my portfolio. We were proactive to start a team that's specific and working on some focus areas, particularly infrastructure, the recovery funds that now are available to the island, and the programs, right? The Title I programs and all the other programs that exist. But I think what we saw most recently is that there's a fourth strand of work, right? We can provide all the technical assistance that we want, but that's not going to move the needle if we're not also looking at helping the education system think about some systemic changes. And when I say the education system, I'm talking about everybody, right? That means community-based organizations. That means the Department of Education, that means the higher ed system, and understanding, as our secretary says, that we have a once in a generation opportunity to reimagine education. And so that doesn't mean just buying new books or, handing out masks, but again, flipping the switch, reimagining the way that we're delivering services to students. And if there's any place that needs it more, it's Puerto Rico, and we recognize that. So that's just a little bit of perspective of how we're approaching this work. And again, just happy to be working on this with my colleagues on the call.
Fantastic. Chris, before you jump off, can you tell us a little bit about the education infrastructure call happening this week so that people can join that? Yes,
thank you, Charlotte. And so we've been working with FEMA and the EPA around an infrastructure toolkit that we just released last week, and we followed that up with a webinar that's happening this Thursday. It's primarily focused, and the audience is primarily geared towards those that are involved in school infrastructure elements, whether that's construction, whether that's design. So there's a lot in that toolkit. But I think also the key here is that we want to ensure that we don't repeat some of the things that have happened in the past when it comes to kind of school infrastructure issues, right? We want the community to be involved in this process. And so thank you to everyone who's been involved in this process, ensuring that community voice is a part of it as we move forward, as these unprecedented funds are gonna either repair or reconstruct schools. But again, ensuring that community voice, partners' voices, everybody is at the table as we rethink kind of the infrastructure piece of schools in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. And thank you to all the participants. I'm gonna pass it back to Frankie to close out our conversation today.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And before we close, Gretchen, I give you a word, and then we can wrap this up.
Good. Well, I would like to thank all of you for your time. I hope you found the information we provided useful. I hope you leave knowing that the Biden administration's commitment to Puerto Rico is very real, and that you have allies not just in the White House, but throughout the federal family, and we're here for you. Thank you, Frankie, for this opportunity by Hispanic Fed.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you to all the participants who joined us today, everybody that logged in. If you want to learn more about all the work that we're doing, you can go to takeactionforpuertorico.org, where you can learn more about the issues and also the efforts. I'd like to thank the hundreds of people who joined us today from across the island and the diaspora for this important conversation. We know there's still much work ahead of us for the administration, for us, for advocates, for service providers, for the people of Puerto Rico. That is something we'll agree on, but we should not let that cloud the reality that investments made in Puerto Rico under this president and this Congress has been nothing short of unprecedented and should not go unappreciated. Thank you, muchísimas gracias, and we see you soon.
Thank you.